Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on April 6th, 2021. And take a look at this picture. What do you see? I see a bunch of smiling people standing together in an open field in a beautiful natural setting, and it looks all positive to me. How about you? I'm not asking you to guess anything complicated, just what's your feeling when you look at this picture? Maybe you feel nothing. Maybe you just say, oh, there's a bunch of nice smiling people. How nice. Outdoors together. So here's what the editor of a local regional magazine has to say. What was your first reaction upon seeing this photo? Perhaps it was like mine. Queasiness bordering on nausea. What in blazes are all these unmasked people doing standing cheek by jowl? I could look at this picture for 1,000 years and not get the impression that guy got. And he's the editor and the director of editorial content for a local magazine that's in this area that's read by thousands of people. And this is his mentality. He sees some happy, healthy people standing together without masks outdoors in a nice setting, and he describes himself as queasy, bordering on nausea. Why? Because he's horrified that unmasked people are standing together cheek by jowl. Wow. Wow. And it just illustrates a couple of points here. Number one, there's a lot of sick puppies out there that have a completely distorted view of what's going on in this world. And number two, unfortunately, a lot of them have editorial control over news outlets, large and small. So we're all aware of the endless lying from CNN and NBC. I mean, they were long-time Brass Check viewers know pre-COVID they couldn't tell the truth if their life depended on it, and if it was a thing that impacted the pharma industry, they were pure 100% shills. And frankly, Fox isn't much better, and you'd be hard pressed to find any news outlets that were really that good. But we have a bigger problem, and it's bigger than the large networks and the news industry. It's the hundreds and thousands of little newspapers and little magazines and little newsletters all over the country where the editors are just repeating the pretty much depraved and demented bottom line, which is we're all supposed to be afraid all the time. And I don't get it. I don't get it. But it shows how, I guess, to use a crude example, shit rolls down the hill. And this is pretty much how our news media is controlled. I've long said that reporters don't report, they repeat. And they don't investigate, they elaborate. So whoever gets the original story out first pretty much wins. And usually the scammers have prepared their story well in advance. I think I've used this example before, but within hours of this obscure guy supposedly shooting John Kennedy, the mass media of the day had reams and reams of biographical information on him. Completely impossible. It was all prepared in advance. So he who gets the story out first typically wins. And they got the story out first and hard, and they kept pushing, and they have managed to turn a lot of people into brain dead, terrified morons. So much so that they look at a photo like this, and their emotional reaction is queasy, bordering on nausea. How twisted do you have to be to look at this picture and have that reaction? And yet this is a guy pumping his mental poison out to thousands and thousands of people every month. And you just take that and you magnify it by thousands of press outlets. They all have COVID experts now. They all have COVID columns. So every week we've got to read about the latest twist on the disease, how many cases. Um, some things came up recently that were interesting. I did a video. I'll see if I can find it and post it below. This thing was a pageant, and it started with a lot of shaky information out of China, people falling over, people going into convulsions, people screaming, none of which have anything to do with a respiratory disease. And those were the images we saw, and we were told that it was a deadly disease. And then they went to northern Italy, which has the most air pollution of any European region, has the oldest population of any European region, has one of the thinnest, it's a modern place, but it has one of the thinnest infrastructures of hospital beds in all of Europe. Places like Germany and even Poland and the Ukraine have literally 4 or 5 times as many as available hospital beds as northern Italy. And every year they have a flu catastrophe where the wards get filled and a lot of old people die. And so they brought the cameras into those wards last year and they called it COVID. And that was the second act of the hysteria pageant. And then the third act of the hysteria pageant was New York City, the most medically neurotic group of people on earth, the most suggestible group of people on earth. And one of the things they loved to use as part of the New York pageant was all the coolers outside the hospitals. Well, a story, and I reported on this, I don't know, it was June or something, that yes, there were a lot of people in bodies in coolers because the funeral homes were either closed or on really reduced service. And believe it or not, when people die, you can't just show up with the family station wagon and bring them home. You have to get a funeral parlor to come and get them. So if the funeral parlor is closed, the bodies will pile up. Had nothing to do with COVID in particular. The other thing I pointed out is that every day people with either no family or family that has no money die in New York. And they typically get sent to a kind of potter's field on this island in the Bronx. And so that was revealed as the island of death. Well, that island of death has been operating for 160 years. And they always stage mass burials there because there's, in a city of, I don't know what it is, 8 million people. That's a lot of people. And under the nicest of circumstances, lots of people die every day, and a percentage of them can't afford burials. Anyway, the Daily News finally came out today or over the weekend with what I was saying back in June. There are still bodies that are being held by the city because the families can't afford the burials. Why? Because everybody lost their jobs, or not everybody, but a lot of working poor people for whom a funeral would have been a big stretch in the best of times don't have work anymore. So they can't claim their loved ones. So all that hysteria and nonsense out of New York was in fact hysteria and nonsense packaged by the news media. We also pointed out that a ridiculous number of people were dying in city-run hospitals. And we did an extended interview with a contract nurse from Florida who basically explained they were being killed with incompetence and neglect. So we'll post that video below for people that need to catch up with what's going on. So anyway, I'm amazed that anybody could look at such a basically sweet picture with a bunch of happy smiling people and become queasy to the point of nausea. Now that to me is a mental illness, and we have people that are mentally ill running our news medias, large and small. They're not reporting, they're repeating. They're not investigating. They're elaborating on the story, the cover story, the official story of the day. So that's Brass Check. And if you are a supporter, great. If you're not a supporter, you should think about it, because who else is sticking with this story and not giving up on it, and pointing out things that, frankly, nobody else is talking about.